Hello and welcome back to day 3 and chapter 3 of our bigger books series where we are currently reading Wind in the Willows. Yesterday we met Mr. Toad and went off on quite some adventure. Let's see where we end up today in chapter 3, The Wild Wood. The mole had long wanted to make the acquaintance of Badger. He seemed by all accounts to be such an important personage and though rarely visible to make his unseen influence felt by everybody about the place. But whenever Mole mentioned his wish to water Rat, he always found himself put off. "It's all right," the Rat would say. "Badger'll turn up some day or other. He's always turning up, and then I'll introduce you. The best of fellows, but you must only take him as you find him, and when you find him. Can you ask him to come here to dinner or something?" said the Mole. "He wouldn't come," replied the Rat simply. "Badger hates society, and invitations, and dinner, and all that sort of thing." "Well then, supposing we go and call on him?" suggested Mole. "Oh, I'm sure he wouldn't like that at all," said the Rat, quite alarmed. "He's so very shy, he's sure to be offended. I've never even ventured to call on him at his own home myself, though I know him so well. Besides, we can't. It's quite out of the question, because he lives in the middle of the wild wood." "Well, supposing he does," said Mole. "You told me the wild wood was all right, you know." "Oh, I know, so it is," replied the Rat evasively. "But I think we won't go there just now. Not just yet. It's a long way, and he wouldn't be home at this time of year anyhow. He'll be coming along some day, if you'll wait quietly." The Mole had to be content with this, but Badger never came along. And every day brought its amusements, and it was not until summer was long over and cold and frosty, miry ways crept in that left them very much indoors, and the swollen river raced past outside their window with a speed that mocked at boating of any sort or kind, that he found himself with his thoughts dwelling again with much persistence on the solitary grey Badger, who lived his own life by himself in his hole in the middle of the wild wood. In the winter time the Rat slept a great deal, retiring early and rising late. During his short day he sometimes scribbled poetry or did other small domestic jobs about the house, and of course there were always animals dropping in for a chat, and consequently there was a good deal of storytelling and comparing notes on the past summer and its doings. Such a rich chapter it had been, when one came to look back at it all, with illustrations so numerous and so very highly coloured. The pageant of the river-bank had marched steadily along, unfolding itself in scene pictures that succeeded each other in stately procession. Purple loosestrife arrived early, shaking luxuriant tangled locks along the edge of the mirror whence its own face laughed back at it. Willowherb, tender and wistful like a pink sunset cloud, was not slow to follow. Comfrey, the purple, hand in hand with the white, crept forth to take its place in the line, and at last one morning the diffident and delaying Dogrose stepped delicately onto the stage, and one knew, as if string music had announced it in stately chords that strayed into a gavotte, that June was at last here. One member of the company was still awaited, the shepherd boy for the nymphs to woo, the knight for whom the ladies waited at the window, the prince that was to kiss the sleeping summer back to life and love. But when Meadowsweet, debonair and odorous in an amber jerkin, moved graciously to his place in the group, then the play was ready to begin. And what a play it had been! Drowsy animals snug in their holes while wind and rain were battering their doors recalled still keen mornings an hour before sunrise, when the white mist, as yet undispersed, clung closely along the surfaces of the water. Then the shock of the early plunge, the scamper along the bank, and the radiant transformation of air, earth, and water, when suddenly the sun was with them again, and the grey was gold, and the colour was born and sprang out of the earth once more. They recalled the languorous siesta of hot midday deep in green undergrowth, the sun striking through the tiny golden shafts and spots, The boating and bathing of the afternoon, the rambles along dusty lanes, through yellow cornfields, and the long, cool evening at last, when so many threads were gathered up, so many friendships rounded, and so many adventures planned for the morrow. There was plenty to talk about on those short winter days when the animals found themselves round the fire. Still, the mole had a great deal of spare time on his hands, and so one afternoon, when Rat was in his armchair before the blaze and alternately dozing and trying over rhymes that wouldn't fit, he formed a resolution to go out by himself and explore the wildwood, and perhaps strike up an acquaintance with Mr. Badger. It was a cold, still afternoon with a hard, steely sky overhead when he slipped out of the warm parlour into the open air. The country lay bare and entirely leafless around him, and he thought that he had never seen so far and so intimately into the insides of things as on a winter day when nature was deep in her annual slumber and seemed to kick the clothes off. Copses, dells, quarries, and all hidden places, which had been mysterious mines for exploration in the leafy summer, now exposed themselves and their secrets pathetically, and seemed to ask him to overlook their shabby poverty for a while, till they could riot in the rich masquerade as before, and trick and entice him with old deceptions. It was pitiful in a way, and yet cheering, even exhilarating. He was glad that he liked the country undecorated, hard and stripped of its finery. He had got down to the bare bones of it, and they were fine and strong and simple. He did not want warm clover and the play of seeding grasses, the screens of quickset and the billowy drapery of beech. With great cheerfulness of spirit he pushed on towards the wildwood, which lay before him, low and threatening, like a black reef in some still southern sea. There was nothing to alarm him at first entry. Twigs crackled under his feet, logs tripped him, funguses on stumps resembled caricatures, and startled him for a moment by their likeness to something familiar and far away. But it was fun and exciting. It led him on. He penetrated to where the light was less and less, and the trees crouched nearer and nearer, and the holes made ugly mouths at him on either side. Everything was very still now. The dusk advanced on him steadily, rapidly gathering in before him and around him, and the light seemed to drain away like floodwater. The faces began. It was over his shoulder, and indistinctly at first, that he thought he saw a little face, small and evil, wedge-shaped face, looking out at him from a hole. When he turned to confront it, the thing had vanished. He quickened his pace, telling himself cheerfully not to begin imagining things, or there'd be simply no end to it. He passed another hole, and another, and another, and then yes, certainly, a little narrow face with hard eyes. It flashed up for an instant from a hole, and then it was gone. He hesitated, braced himself up for an effort, and strode on. Then, suddenly, as if it had been so all the time, every hole, far and near, there were hundreds of them, seemed to possess its own little face, coming and going rapidly, and fixing glances on him of malice and hatred, all hard-eyed and evil and sharp. If he could only get away from the holes in the banks, he thought, there would be no more faces. He swung off the path and plunged into the untrodden places of the wood. Then the whistling began. Very faint and shrill it was, and far behind him when he first heard it. But somehow it made him hurry forward. Then, still very faint and shrill, it sounded far ahead of him, and made him hesitate and want to go back. As he halted in indecision,
It broke out on either side of him and seemed caught up and passed throughout the whole length of the wood to its farthest limit. They were up and alert and ready, evidently, whoever they were, and he was alone and unarmed and far from any help, and the night was closing in. Then the pattering began. He thought it was only falling leaves at first, so slight and delicate was the sound of it. Then it took a regular rhythm, and he knew it was for nothing else but the pat, pat, pat of little feet still a very long way off. Was it in front or behind? It seemed to be the first one, and then the other, and then both. It grew and it multiplied till every quarter, as he listened anxiously, leaning this way and that, it seemed to be closing in on him. As he stood still to hearken, a rabbit came running hard towards him through the leaves. He waited, expecting it to slacken a pace or two and swerve from him or take a different course instead. The animal brushed him as he dashed past, his face set hard and its eyes staring. "Get out of this, you fool! Get out!" The mole heard him mutter as he swung round a stump and disappeared down a friendly burrow. The pattering increased till it sounded like the hail on a dry leaf carpet spread all around him. The whole wood seemed to be running now, running hard, hunting, chasing, closing in around something or somebody. In panic he began to run too, aimlessly, not knowing where. He knew not hither or nor whither. He ran up against things, he fell over things and into things, he darted under things and dodged round things. At last he took refuge in the deep, dark hollow of an old beech tree, which offered shelter, concealment, perhaps even safety, but who could tell? Anyhow, he was far too tired to run any further, and he could only snuggle down into the dry leaves which had drifted into the hollow and hope he was safe for the time. And as he lay there, panting and trembling and listening to the whistles and the patterings outside, he knew at last, in its fullness, that dread thing which other dwellers in the field and hedgerow had encountered here, and known as their darkest moment. That thing which Rat had vainly tried to shield him from before. The terror of the wild wood.
Meantime, the rat, warm and comfortable, dozed by his fireside. His paper of half-finished verses slipped from his knee. His head fell back, his mouth opened, and he wandered by the verdant banks of dream rivers. Then a coal slipped, the fire crackled and sent up a spurt of flame, and he woke with a start. Remembering what he'd been engaged upon, he reached down to the floor for his verses, pored over them for a minute, and looked round for the mole, to ask him if he knew a good rhyme for something or other. But the mole was not there. He listened for a time, and the house seemed very quiet. Then he called, "Moley!" several times, and receiving no answer, got up and went out into the hall. The mole's cap was missing from its accustomed peg. His galoshes, which always lay by the umbrella stand, were also gone. The rat left the house and carefully examined the muddy surface of the ground outside, hoping to find the mole's tracks. They were there, sure enough. The galoshes were new, just bought for the winter, and the pimples on their sole were fresh and sharp. You could see the imprints of them in the mud, running along straight and purposeful, leading direct to the wild wood. The rat looked very grave and stood in deep thought for a minute or two, and then he re-entered the house, strapped a belt around his waist, shoved a brace of pistols into it, took out a stout cudgel that stood in the corner of the hall, and set off for the wild wood at a smart pace. It was already getting towards dusk when he reached the first fringe of trees and plunged without hesitation into the wood, looking anxiously on either side for any sign of his friend. Here and there wicked little faces popped out of holes, but vanished immediately at the sight of the valorous animal, his pistols and great cudgel in his grasp, and the whistling and pattering which he had heard quite plainly on his first entry died away and ceased, and all was very still. He made his way manfully through the length of the wood to its furthest edge. Then, forsaking all paths, he set himself to traverse it laboriously, working over the whole ground, and all the time calling out cheerfully, "Molly! Molly! Molly! Where are you? It's me! It's all right!" He had patiently hunted through the wood for an hour or more, when at last, to his joy, he heard a little answering cry. Guiding himself by the sound, he made his way through the gathering darkness to the foot of an old beech tree with a hole in it, and out from the hole came a feeble voice saying, "Ratty, is that really you?" The rat crept into the hollow, and there he found Mole, exhausted and still trembling. "Oh, Rat," he cried, "I've been so frightened, you can't think." I quite understand," said Rat soothingly. "You shouldn't really have gone and done it, Mole. I did my best to keep you from it. We river bankers hardly ever come here by ourselves. If we have to come, we come in couples at least. Then we're generally all right. Besides, there are 100 things one has to know, which we understand all about, and you don't as yet. I mean, passwords and signs and sayings which have power and effect, and plants you carry in your pocket, and verses you repeat, and dodges and tricks you practice. All simple enough when you know them, but they've got to be known if you're small, or you'll find yourself in trouble. Of course, if Badger or Otter were with you, then it would be quite another matter." "Surely the brave Mr. Toad wouldn't mind coming here all by himself, would he?" inquired the Mole. "Oh, Toad!" said the Rat, laughing heartily. "He wouldn't show his face in her alone. Not for a hat full of golden guineas, Toad wouldn't." The Mole was greatly cheered by the sound of Rat's careless laughter, as well as by the sight of his stick and gleaming pistols, and he stopped shivering and began to feel bolder and more himself again. "Now then," said Rat presently, "we really must pull ourselves together and make a start for home while there's still a little light left. It'll never do to spend the night here, you understand. Too cold for one thing." "Dear Ratty," said poor Mole, "I'm dreadfully sorry, but I'm simply dead beat, and that's a solid fact. You must let me rest here a while longer and get my strength back if I'm ever to get home at all." "All right," said the good-natured Rat, "rest away. It's pretty nearly pitch dark now anyhow, and there ought to be a bit of a moon later." So the Mole got well up into the dry leaves and stretched himself out, and presently dropped off to sleep, though it was a broken and troubled sort of sleep, while Rat covered himself up too as best he might for warmth, and lay patiently waiting with his pistol in his paw. When at last the Mole woke up, much refreshed and in his usual spirits, the Rat said, "Now then, I'll just take a look outside and see if everything's quiet, and then we really must be off." He went to the entrance of their retreat and put his head out. Then the Mole heard him saying quietly to himself, "Hullo, hullo, here is a go." "What's up, Ratty?" asked Mole. "Snow is up," replied the Rat briefly. "Or rather, down. It's snowing hard." The Mole came up and crouched beside him, and looking out, saw that the wood that had been so dreadful to him before was now quite changed in aspect. Holes and hollows, pools and pitfalls, and other black menaces to the wayfarer were vanishing fast, and a gleaming carpet of fairy was springing up everywhere that looked too delicate to be trodden upon by rough feet. A fine powder filled the air and caressed his cheek with a tingle in its touch. The black boles of trees showed up in a light that seemed somehow to come from below. Well, it can't be helped," said the Rat after pondering. "We must make a start and take our chances. I suppose the worst of it is, don't exactly know where we are, and now the snow makes everything look so different." It did indeed. The mole would not have known it were the same wood. However, they set out bravely and took the line that seemed most promising, holding on to each other and pretending with invincible cheeriness that they recognised an old friend in every fresh tree, and grimly and silently greeted them, or saw openings, gaps, paths with a familiar turn in them in the monotony of white space and black tree trunks that refused to vary. An hour or two later, they had lost account of time altogether. They pulled up, dispirited, weary, and hopelessly at sea, and sat down on a fallen tree trunk to recover their breath and consider what had to be done. They were aching with fatigue and bruised with tumbles. They had fallen into several holes and got wet through. The snow was now getting so deep that they could hardly drag their little feet through it, and the trees were thicker and more like each other than ever. There seemed to be no end to this wood, and no beginning, and no difference in it, and, worst of all, no way out. "We can't sit here very long," said the rat. "We shall have to make a push for it and do something or other. The cold is too awful to do anything. The snow will soon be too deep to wade through." He peered about him and considered. "Look here," he went on. "This is what occurs to me. There's a sort of dell down here in front of us, and the ground's all hilly and humpy and hummocky. We'll make our way down into that, and try to find some sort of shelter, a cave or a hole with a dry floor to it, and be out of the snow and wind, and there we'll have a good rest before we try again, for we're both of us pretty dead beat. Besides, the snow may leave off, or something might turn up." So once more they got to their feet and struggled down into the dell, where they hunted about for a cave or some corner that was dry and a protection from the keen wind and whirling snow. They were investigating one of the hummocky bits that Rat had spoken of, when suddenly Mole tripped up and fell forward on his face with a squeal. "Oh, my leg!" he cried. "My poor shin!" And he sat up in the snow and nursed his leg in both front paws. "Poor old Mole," said Rat kindly. "You don't seem to be having much luck today, do you? Let's have a look at that leg. Yes," he went on, going down onto his knees. "You've cut your shin, sure enough. Wait till I get my handkerchief. I'll tie it up for you." "I must have tripped over a hidden branch or a stump," said the Mole miserably. Oh my, oh my. "It's very clean cut," said the Rat, examining it again attentively. "This was never done by a branch or a stump. It looks as if it was made by some sharp edge of something in metal. Funny." He pondered a while and examined the humps and the hummocks and slopes around him. "Well, never mind what's done it," said the Mole, forgetting his grammar in his pain. "It hurts just the same, whatever done it." But the Rat, after carefully tying up his leg with a handkerchief, had left him, and he was busy scraping in the snow. He scratched and shovelled and explored, all four legs working busily, while the Mole waited impatiently, remarking at intervals, "Oh, come on, Rat." Suddenly the Rat cried, "Hooray!" and then "Hooray, hooray, hooray!" and fell to executing a feeble jig in the snow. "What have you found, Ratty?" asked Mole, still nursing his leg. "Come and see," said the delighted Rat as he jigged on. The Mole hobbled up to the spot and had a good look. "Well," he said at last slowly, "I see it right enough. Seen the same sort of thing before, lots of times. A familiar object. I'd call it a door scraper." "Well, what of it? Why dance jigs around a door scraper?" "But don't you see what it means, you dull-witted animal?" cried the Rat impatiently. "Of course I see what it means," replied the Mole. "It seems to me to mean that some very careless or forgetful person has left his door scraper lying about in the middle of the wild wood, just where it's sure to trip everybody up. Very thoughtless of him, I call it. When I get home I shall go and complain about it to somebody or other. You see if I don't." Oh dear, cried Rat in despair at his obtuseness. Here, stop arguing and come and scrape. And he went to work again, making the snow fly in all directions around him. After some toil, his efforts were rewarded, and a very shabby doormat lay exposed to view. There, what did I tell you? Exclaimed the Rat in great triumph. Absolutely nothing whatever, replied the Mole in perfect truthfulness. Well now, he went on, you seem to have found another piece of domestic litter, done for and thrown away, and I suppose you're perfectly happy. Better go ahead and dance your jig round it if you've got to, and get it over, and then perhaps we can go on and not waste any more of our time over rubbish heaps. Can we eat a doormat, or sleep under a doormat, or sit on a doormat and sledge home over the snow, you exasperating rodent? Do you mean to say, cried the Rat, that this doormat doesn't tell you anything? Really, Rat, said the Mole quite pettishly, I think we've had enough of this folly. Who ever heard of a doormat telling anyone anything? They simply don't do it. They're not at all that sort. Doormats know their place. Now look here, you thick-headed beast, replied the Rat, really angry. This must stop. Not another word, but scrape, scrape and scratch and dig and hunt around, especially on the sides of the hummocks. If you want to sleep dry and warm tonight, this is our last chance. The Rat attacked the snowbank beside them with ardour, probing with his cudgel everywhere, and then digging with fury. The Mole scraped busily too, more to oblige the Rat than for any other reason, for his opinion was that his friend was getting light-headed. Some 10 minutes' hard work, and the point of Rat's stick struck something which sounded hollow. He worked till he could get a paw through and feel, then came to the Mole and called him to help. Hard at it went the two animals, till as a result of their labours, stood full in view of the astonished and hitherto incredulous Mole. In the side of what had appeared to be a snowbank stood a solid-looking door, painted dark green. An iron bell-pull hung by the side, and below it, on a small brass plate, neatly engraved in square capital letters they could read with the aid of moonlight, Mr. Badger. The Mole fell backwards on the snow from sheer surprise and delight. Rat, he cried in penitence, you're a wonder, a real wonder, that's what you are. I see it all now. You argued it out step by step in that wise head of yours. From the very moment I fell and cut my shin, and you looked at the cut, and at once your majestic mind said to itself, door scraper. And then you turned to and found the very door scraper that had done it. Did you stop there? No. Some people would have been quite satisfied, but not you. Your intellect went on working. Let me only just find a doormat, says you to yourself, and my theory is proved. And of course, you found your doormat. You're so clever. I believe you could find anything that you liked. Now, says you, and now that door exists, as plain as if I saw it. There's much else seems to be done. I'm going to have to do that bit again. The Mole fell backwards on the snow from sheer surprise and delight. Rat, he cried in penitence, you're a wonder, a real wonder, that's what you are. I see it all now. You argued it out step by step in that wise head of yours from the very moment I fell and cut my shin. You looked at the cut, and at once your majestic mind said to itself, door scraper. And you turned to and found that very door scraper that had done it. Did you stop there? No. Some people would have been quite satisfied, but not you. Your intellect went on working. Let me only just find a doormat, says you to myself, and my theory is proved. And of course, you found your doormat. You're so clever. I believe you could find anything you liked. Now, says you, that door exists as plain as if I saw it. There's nothing else remains to be done but to find it. Well, I've read about this sort of thing in books, but I've never come across it before in my real life. You ought to go where you'll be properly appreciated. You're simply wasted here among us fellows. If only I had your head, Ratty. But as you haven't, interrupted the Rat rather unkindly, I suppose you're going to sit in the snow all night and talk. Get up at once and hang on to that bell pull you see there, and hang hard. As hard as you can while I hammer. While the Rat attacked the door with his stick, the Mole sprang up and pulled the bell pull. clutched it and swung there, both feet off the ground, and from quite a long way off he could hear a deep-toned bell respond. There we go, the end of chapter 3, an exciting one, the tense bit in the middle there. I hope you enjoyed our little trip to the wild wood itself. Now, before I go, I am going to send straight over very quickly to me in the woods to give you one quick announcement about making sensible choices during this tricky time. Then I'll be back, I'll say goodbye, and we'll go on from there.
Hello, back very quickly in the woods at the end of the video, just to let you know I had popped out for my daily bit of exercise. I popped out on my bicycle with my helmet on, of course, and brought my costume with me so I could read you just a short section from the wild wood itself. Now, as long as I don't get caught by any of those little faces, I'm going to head straight home now. I'm going to wash up my hands and get changed again, and then I'll put up the rest of the story.
Here we go, back again. Just leaves for me to say goodbye, and I will see you tomorrow for chapter 4, Mr. Badger.